Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to everybody online. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to see you all, meet you all, speak with you for just a little bit this morning. Just by way of a little bit more further introduction, I am a veterinarian. I'm a recovering veterinarian. I'm Chief Zoological Officer for SeaWorld, so I don't do a lot of clinical care practice anymore, but as a veterinarian, I'm very proud to lead all of our zoological programs for the SeaWorld organization, which includes the Busch Gardens parks, and not just the care of the animals within our parks, but obviously the work we're able to do for conservation around the world, rescue and rehabilitation, and the extensive portfolio of projects that we have. Just a little bit of why I think I'm here. So we just opened the newest SeaWorld park in the world. It is now our fourth SeaWorld park, fifth if you count SeaWorld of Ohio going back many years, but currently operating parks, it is our fourth SeaWorld park. It's SeaWorld Abu Dhabi. It is an extraordinary park, and it is really, for those of us who have been working with marine mammals or in the aquarium world, it is the realization of the hopes and dreams of a lot of us who have been working in an extraordinary zoological setting at the SeaWorld parks and now have the opportunity to build the next level park. But this talk is not about SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, but why it's important for this talk is that in order to open the park, in order to have animals at the park, we had to move some of our dolphins, sea lions, penguins, and a few other animals, harbor seals, from the United States over to Abu Dhabi. That move was the largest single undertaking that our organization has ever had in terms of an animal transportation, a marine mammal and other species transportation. And to do it, obviously, for any animal transfer, you work closely with your partners, your regulatory agencies and trusted partners in government. And so naturally, we had a lot of back and forth with Carolyn McKinney and our other partners at the USDA as we were going through the permitting process and ultimately the approvals necessary to move those animals. And so as part of that ongoing dialogue with Dr. McKinney and others, she became very interested in how we were able to do this move safely. And I think that was the genesis for maybe why I'm here. She had the opportunity to share that story with Chad and Don. And because it was our largest undertaking of safe movement of marine mammals around the world, it can provide a little bit of insight into how we think about this critically important thing. I'm going to say this hopefully several times over and over again through the course of my presentation this morning, which is, and Dr. Keller just alluded to this, every one of these animals to us is precious cargo. We put a lot of time and energy into the safe and secure transport of every animal we have the opportunity to touch when we're doing these moves. And so I'll have fewer details about metrics of what we're measuring from moment to moment as we're doing these animal transports this morning, but I will spend a lot of time talking about how we think about the process, how much time we invest in the process, preparing for a safe move for the animals. And in this particular case, for the largest animal transport we've ever done, to ultimately, and I'm proud to say, safely move every individual animal from the United States over to SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, a 27-hour trip without incident, and to have those animals arrive safely in their new homes and adjust well to their new homes. So this isn't about the Abu Dhabi transport, but I will be pulling examples from time to time over the course of this talk. And it is a moment of pride for us, but I really want to emphasize that it is a critically important thing that we do, and it requires care and attention at every turn. All right, so I'm going to go back to some very basics because I don't want to assume anybody in the room knows everything about the marine mammal community and how we care for and what types of animals we care for. So marine mammal species, of which there are many, not just bottlenose dolphins, live in accredited zoos and aquariums here in the United States. So again, it's not just whales and dolphins that we're talking about, but California sea lions, harbor seals, sea otters. Our transport, international transport, is commonly sea otters. And for as difficult as a bottlenose dolphin is to move, or a killer whale is to move, sea otters are some of the most temperamental animals. And we spend a lot more time worrying about our sea otters on a typical transport than we do about our bottlenose dolphins. We aren't just moving animals from zoological park to zoological park, however. There are lots of other scenarios in which we find ourselves moving marine mammals. Marine mammal rescue and rehabilitation is another primary place where people here in the United States and internationally are transporting animals, usually from the beach back to the rehabilitation center, and fingers crossed, if the rehab is successful, back out to the ocean again. I'll spend most of my time talking about that zoo-to-zoo transportation today, but I will also try to reference how we approach it when we're doing marine mammal rescue. Zoo-to-zoo transfer gives us plenty of time to plan that move, focus on all the details, and assure that healthy animals are moving from point A to point B, arriving healthy and adjusting well. Rescue and rehab is a different story. Those animals are usually critically ill, and you're moving quickly, and you're having to make adjustments and decisions on the fly. And so there are two different move scenarios. However, our ethic is ultimately exactly the same. We want that animal to arrive safely and to thrive wherever they're going, be it to another zoo or back out into the ocean somewhere. And then there are some sort of hybrid moves. Rescue and rehab isn't always about bringing that animal back to your rehab facility and then putting them out into the ocean. It can just be from one place in the ocean to another place in the ocean. So our rescue teams will, not uncommonly and seemingly with increasing frequency these days, respond to a bottlenose dolphin that has made its way into some freshwater body and is trapped in there. Bottlenose dolphins can't live in fresh water for more than about 3 or 4 days. And so working with our partners at National Marine Fisheries Service, we'll go pick that dolphin up, maybe disentangle it if it has fishing gear on it, and then move it back out into a saltwater environment and release it immediately. And there again, you're picking up an unknown animal, you're doing everything you can to assess its health, and then you're very quickly and efficiently moving it safely for the people as well, and putting it back out into the ocean. So I've said this a couple of times now, but I really want to state it because it is the driving force behind every decision that we make when we're considering a marine mammal move, or any animal move for that matter. Foundational to this process and to everything we do in this profession is animal safety and welfare. So we spend a lot of time working through the consideration set that's necessary for the particular species that we'll be working with on that move. Equally important, arguably a little more important, is the human safety element. These moves with animals, any animal can be dangerous at any point in time, no matter what kind of relationship you have with that animal. And so we really need to focus on the human safety aspects of what we're doing. And if it's not animal-centric, it's equipment-centric. Pulling off these moves requires big, heavy equipment. Bottlenose dolphin is anywhere from 400 to 800 pounds. Male California sea lion may be larger than that. A killer whale is definitely larger than that. And so you're dealing with heavy equipment, and you're moving that equipment relatively quickly or efficiently. And so we focus as much on the human safety aspect of what we're doing as we do on the animal safety and animal welfare aspects of what we're doing. So both are paramount. And then this sounds basic, but it's worth emphasizing that the keys to success are preparation, coordination, absolutely communication, and last but not least, and this is harder to come by these days, but experience. Within the zoological profession, we are experiencing a fairly significant turnover, revitalization of the workforce. And so the experience, the firsthand knowledge of transporting these animals may be one of the most important aspects of what we do. And so passing that experience on from generation to generation is critically important and valuable. And it's why this move that I referred to that we recently did with SeaWorld Abu Dhabi was a big benefit to us organizationally, because we were able to develop that next generation of animal stewards and animal transport experts that we've been very fortunate to develop within our team and within our community, the professionally accredited zoological community that has lots of people with expertise on these safe moves. Every move is an opportunity to teach that next person how to safely do it. And then the other obvious statement is we don't just, particularly with marine mammals, pick them up and move them on a whim, or we're not allowed to. But even if we could, we wouldn't do so. We do operate under the permissions and the authorities of these two agencies, which overlap depending upon which particular animal you're working with, to have both the approval and essentially the allowance to move animals from point A to point B. So marine mammals are all listed in accredited zoos here in the United States under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Marine Mammal Inventory. And so when we go to move a marine mammal from zoo to zoo, we do so with a 15-day notice approval from National Marine Fisheries Service. USDA is always aware of those transports as well, and we have good communication with our partners when we're doing it. And then rescue and rehabilitation is also done under the authorization of National Marine Fisheries Service. So rehab facilities are permitted by NOAA, and we will not go and pick up a dolphin or a sea lion or any other animal off the beach that's regulated by NOAA. Sea turtles would be included in this without the permission granted from our partners as part of the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Network. All right. I just want to keep myself on time here. We're good. Okay. So I want to hang on animal considerations here for just 1 second. Obviously, the transport of the animal, how you move that animal, is one of the key factors for the success of safely moving any species from point A to point B. For marine mammals, I put a picture up here of the bottlenose dolphin. Bottlenose dolphins are some of the more complicated animals to move. And what we now, as part of this generation of animal stewards, have the benefit of is all of the practices that have come before us to develop this highly specialized methodology for carrying and safely moving this particular species, as well as all the other cetacean species, from zoo to zoo. So if you're moving a bottlenose dolphin from a zoo to zoo, you use a carrier that looks like this. But the rules that apply to all marine mammal species focus on these 4 categories that allow us to maintain the comfort and the health of that animal as it's moving. So thermal regulation, I think all of you know marine mammals evolved to live in a giant heat sink. So living in the ocean means that environment is constantly trying to rob that animal of heat. Accordingly, they either have thick blubber or thick fur or something that's going to keep them warm, naturally warm in any environment. And so a manatee, a bottlenose dolphin, California sea lion is most likely to overheat as part of their transportation event, even if they're calm, but especially if they're not particularly calm for their move, they're very likely to overheat. And so temperature is probably your number one thing. It is the main thing that we end up focusing on. So we never transport one of these animals unless they are in a climate controlled environment. Manatee coming off the beach is in a refrigerated truck. Bottlenose dolphin flying from one zoo to another one is in a temperature controlled airplane. And we keep the airplane at 40 degrees or lower. All the humans are bundled up in jackets and coats, but the dolphin's comfort or the sea lion's comfort is the most important thing to us. Space, the amount of space that you afford the animal is a trade-off. Are they able to move and reposition their bodies safely? Or is there too much room for them to move around? And so I have some examples of other transport units for other species here where I'll show you that there are certainly standards for how you position those animals. This picture is from the IATA regs, and I'll share that reference at the end. But it's always a trade-off between how much room does that animal need to be comfortable and to exercise its muscles, and or too much room for them to move around and potentially injure themselves as a part of the transport. Support. So for the cetaceans and for sea otters, the opportunity to float in the water adds to their overall comfort. It also aids in their thermal regulation. So we can ice this water, keep the water temperature as low as is comfortable for the animal, but it also serves in some flotation capacity. This design allows us to both support the bottlenose dolphin's body weight, keep them comfortably restricted so they're not moving around a whole lot, but then the water also helps us thermoregulate and keep their bodies afloat, keep them comfortable. And last but not least, cleanliness and hygiene. Really, really important to maintain these facilities. Remember, this is essentially a small pool that the dolphin is transported in. In the case of sea otters, I'll show you here a little bit, it is another small pool, allowing the otters to swim around during a longer transport. And as you might expect, if you're traveling for several hours, that water can get dirty. And so if you go back a number of years, you were moving quickly and hoping that water quality wasn't a negative compromise in the animal's health. Now we have self-contained filtration units that we'll bring along on these transports. Again, this is zoo to zoo that allows us to clean the water while the animal is transporting. Not every unit has a filter, but we'll have a central filtration facility and a water changeout that we can use to shift water around, filter it, and put it back in to keep that water as clean as possible. Okay, this is not a bird talk, but I thought we moved penguins too, so I thought I would include a picture of penguins, since I know we'll be talking about birds later on in the agenda here. But a couple other examples of these IATA-approved transport units that are designed, again, for the safety of the animals and the effective transfer of the animals. So on the left, you have what would be a sea lion unit or a harbor seal unit. You can see the label there. That label is not for the professional staff that are going along with the animal, but it's for everybody else who's involved in the process, who's never seen a sea lion before and thinks that they can just stick their fingers in. And then your king penguins over here in a modified Magnum box that has good airflow and is filled with snow underneath them there. With our sea lion or a walrus transport box, also we'll have a floor, a plastic floor that you'll fill with water. We can freeze that. So again, thermal regulation, even for an animal that doesn't need to travel in the water, is critically important. And so we'll put beds of ice down for these guys as part of their trip. I'll talk about partners and airlines and otherwise, but one of the things anyone who's moved any of these species before knows is you make a giant mess in the airplane or in the truck or otherwise. We do fly with fresh water. In case there's any questions about that, salt water would rust the hell out of the airplanes, and so fresh water is what we use to keep the animals clean, cool, and comfortable. And then in this case, I am referring to the SeaWorld Abu Dhabi transport because we did move northern sea otters from SeaWorld of San Diego to SeaWorld of Abu Dhabi. As I mentioned, sea otters are particularly tricky to move. They have a tendency to get their coats matted as a part of their transport. Up until this point, sea otters were conventionally transported dry in a dog carrier with a PVC rack that's in the bottom so that they are kept up off of, if they urinate or defecate, that passes down through. It's rolly, it's soft, they can lay on their backs and not get their fur matted. If their fur gets matted at any point in the process, when they end up on the other end of things, they can have issues with thermal regulation, and it can be a compromise to their health and well-being. This was, we believed, one of the longest transports that sea otters had ever been on. We worked in partnership with our colleagues at the Alaska Sea Life Center to develop a new methodology for moving sea otters. And we came up with this essentially mini habitat. So it's half water, it's half dry rest. You can kind of get a sense for where it looks like here. So on the right-hand side is a picture of the otters laying up on dry rest. If they go just to their, well, our left in that picture, that's where the pool portion of their environment is. And then we designed this to be palletized because we knew they were going to fly. And so a key component of this, and one that's missing, is the reservoir of water. That's what's sitting next to it. And then what is missing is the filtration unit. So again, self-contained and a little bit of innovation, because we knew that this was going to be a very long trip. And up until this point, we were only really aware of otters that had made their way to Europe before with a more conventional transport methodology. This new methodology we're really happy with, and the otters made it safe and sound. Okay, so these zoo-to-zoo transports are large and detailed undertakings. And so this is more the human element of the move, the coordination, the communication, and the expertise. When we're doing these transports, again, I'll use the zoo-to-zoo example, but rescue and rehab, think of lots of the same details, but a little bit more expedient implementation of it, because rescue and rehab we're doing every day, so we have a well-worn pathway of how to do those moves safely and effectively. But when we're moving marine mammals from zoo to zoo, that doesn't happen every day. That happens a couple of times a year. And accordingly, and we're working with non-zoological professionals to deliver our animals safely from point A to point B. So they require immense planning and immense communication. We don't do any marine mammal move without a very thorough written transport plan. That written transport plan contains all the details. Which flight are we going to be on? What's our carrier? What's our time frame? Down to the minute. Who's a part of that transport? Which personnel, which professionals are going? Who's part of the communication tree associated with that move? Everyone in our organization knows, myself included, knows the details of when we are moving. Sorry, not everyone in our organization. Our CEO has no idea, but he's aware when we're moving marine mammals. But the team that's responsible will put together that detailed transport plan, including any and all variables, and we'll start mapping that out weeks, or in the case of SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, months and years before we're actually doing the move. Because the move is so complicated, touches so many people, that we need to make sure that we have a robust plan. And in the case of many of these transports, particularly this one, we share the metrics of that move and some of the details of it with our partners at the USDA, so that they can see how we're looking at it and how we're approaching it. We really, really emphasize having a short duration move. We want that move to be as short as logistically possible, without introducing significant risk. So we don't want to rush anything. We want to be very, very efficient. And again, it comes back to planning. What time of day do you want to move? How do you get there? What is your pathway? Timing of the move. So there's, if you pay attention to any legends out there about SeaWorld moving animals, you'll hear they always move at night, under the cloak of night and the secrecy of night. We do, but not because we're trying to be secret. We do that animal transport at night, usually, if we can do it at night, and everything accordingly, for two primary reasons. One, there's very little traffic, and traffic will get in the way. And it will slow down your move. Remember, precious cargo. So we want to be as efficient and quick as we possibly can. We don't want to get stuck in a traffic jam. Two, unless you're here this week, it's cooler at night. And so we know that if we do have a problem with whatever it is, the truck, the plane, or otherwise, and we have to take the animals off of that unit, they're not going to overheat as a part of that process, generally speaking. And I didn't write here, but there's a seasonal aspect to it too, which many of you are familiar with, which is for most of our animals that we're moving, you're moving at the coolest time of year, if at all possible. Again, you're trying to avoid you're assuming something is going to fail as a part of that move. And so you are avoiding the outside risks by placing it in a strategic time frame. We have a lot of considerations. I mentioned the experience that's necessary, but the caliber and capabilities of the various platforms that you're on, and the strength and partnerships that you have. So platform just mean plane, truck, whatever the case might be, whatever you're moving the animal with. And so it can be, how good is the driver? How good is the forklift guy? How good is the pilot? How much experience does the load master have? Because if you're moving any of these animals on airplanes, load master's role is crucial. And the planning of the load can actually slow down your move. And so I'll say more about this later, but we will map this all out. We will negotiate everything. We know the weights of every single pallet that we're putting together when we're doing these moves. And we're building that into our transport plan so that all the day's variables are removed. Redundancy, we go by the military adage, 2 is 1, 1 is none. So for every one of these moves, this is why I have the picture there, which is, as I look at it now, just really giant bags of ice. But it is a caravan of transport. This is a picture from us loading out and heading to the airport as part of that first leg for the Abu Dhabi move. But we have backups to our backups at every level, making sure that really our only rate limiting step there is, are our backups getting in the way of the primary move, or are they exceeding our weight capacity for that particular move? So redundancy is critical, up to and including staff. We'll usually have more staff go as far as they can in the transport. Usually we can't double the staff on the airplane, but if we get there and someone is injured, that person may have to step out. Doesn't happen with any frequency at all, but if they get sick, if they get COVID, whatever the case might be, you've got somebody else ready to step in and help do that move. And then I've seen it both ways. I've seen us have wildly experienced load masters and the technical folks, the folks who are outside our organization, but we're reliant on for this safe move. And I've seen the very, very experienced ones, which make your move so wonderfully efficient and fast. And then I've seen the folks who have never done it before, never seen a dolphin before, never seen a sea lion before, and are more interested in taking pictures of the animal than they are doing the load out. And so wherever possible, whenever possible, we're kind of jerks about picking who on the other team, some other staff, who's going to be involved in it, because it's not that we don't want them to see and appreciate the animals. Of course we do, but just not right then, because we've got to move very, very quickly. This is a picture of us prepping for loadout here. This is the Abu Dhabi transport. Each one of those blue boxes is a dolphin box, dolphin transport box. You can see the stretchers sitting in there. The reason I use this picture is to give you a sense of every one of the steps that has to happen as part of a safe and effective bottlenose dolphin move. In this particular case, let's swap out dolphin, consider sea lion, swap out sea lion, consider otter, any of the marine mammals that we're moving between zoos. You'll see 6 points of tie down for every one of those boxes, pre-palletized, ready to go. Those orange buckets there are for the attendants. We do have attendants travel with the dolphins in the trucks. I'll come back to how we think about attendants, but everyone has their scooper cup, all the tools and supplies necessary to care for that animal moment to moment over the course of its move. And then what our team did in preparation for this, again, the most extreme example of an animal transport, but back up from this and consider that a measure of this is happening with every single move, is set this up, take this down, set this up, take this down, so that they know it in and out, and there is nothing left, or as little as possible left to chance, or somebody not knowing what that right next step is. Up into including dry runs. Take this equipment to the airport, take it back, make sure our assumptions on time are right, do it on a different night without animals, and I'll talk about animal prep here in the next segment, but we build up to these moves as much as possible. So again, nothing is left to chance. Okay, the part you guys probably actually wanted to hear about, because most of us are veterinarians in the room, but preparing the animals for the move. So as I mentioned, rescue and rehab, there's not a lot of time to prep that animal. In fact, that animal is in an emergent situation, and it's really a different category of animal that you're moving. So I'm gonna talk about the zoo to zoo move as the gold standard for us here, because it is where we have the most time and the most control over what that animal's experience is from its initiation to its final place, final zoo arrival point. Obviously, Dr. Duraco here is working on a walrus kid, but thorough and comprehensive clinical assessment. We want to know exactly what is going on with that animal. And we want to make sure that that everything that's going on with it is completely normal, that there's no health issues at all. Health issue for an animal will really change our considerations for its move. And in fact, we won't. If this is a voluntary move, if we're doing this from zoo to zoo, we certainly won't move an animal that has a clinical condition. Or if it's an older animal and it has a known and managed clinical condition, we may move it, but it factors into the consideration set. As we're getting closer to our move, those intervals of assessment and review become more frequent. They may not be more detailed. We may not be getting more bloods or anything like that, but we will continually assess that animal as we're getting closer and closer to animal move. And as I said already, they have to be stable, right? They can't have an active illness show up, and then we never let sort of critical momentum just carry us through. We work very, very hard to say, responding veterinarian has the right to call the move at any moment, because we even when you've got money on the line, even when you've prepaid for everything, the transport has to happen. You've got an expecting audience on the other end. If that animal is not healthy to transport, that animal doesn't transport. That's not specific to marine mammals. I'm sure we all have that same philosophy when we're thinking about these moves. Okay, so we're veterinarians. You get a sense of what the care of the animal looks like leading up to its transport. We really focus, again, in the zoological setting, when they're animals we know, and most of you probably know, but marine mammals in zoos and aquariums receive a ton of attention. We use positive reinforcement training to develop their knowledge of behaviors that allow us to manage their health, so-called husbandry behaviors, and many other things. Behavioral management is part of the enrichment of these animals' lives in these zoos. And so we have very close relationships with the animals. And so their behavioral health, their behavioral readiness for this transport is also paramount and of critical importance for us. So we don't just identify the animals, make sure they're physically healthy, and then say, okay, guys, 3 weeks from now, everyone's moving from zoo A to zoo B. We spend a lot of time developing the animals to make sure that they're going to be as comfortable as they possibly can throughout that transport. Some might say we go a little overboard, but we know that with good behavioral preparation comes the reduced likelihood of the animal being stressed over the course of its move, requiring veterinary intervention over the course of its move, potentially requiring sedation over the course of its move. We want to avoid those things at all cost because they introduce variables that could introduce risk over the course of the animal's move. And so this was a story that I shared with Chad and Don, which was we will have our animals practice their move at every single step for as much as possible, for as much time as possible before they go on that move. So I'll use the bottlenose dolphins as an example. We knew we were moving bottlenose dolphins from SeaWorld in the United States to SeaWorld Abu Dhabi. Even our experienced dolphins, so dolphins who had moved before, this was going to be a longer trip for them, the longest trip that any of them had ever taken. But we had dolphins that had never taken a trip as part of this, preparing for this move. And so our animal care staff, our animal training staff, developed every one of those dolphins for that move by putting them through the paces, gradually working them through the paces. And so the steps and stages of that would be, we're gonna have you swim into a stretcher. We're gonna lift you up. We're gonna get you comfortable sitting in that stretcher. That's step one. Step two is we're going to move the stretcher into the box. We're going to let you sit there for a little bit. Then you're going to go back to your house. Building that behavior up to and including every bottlenose dolphin sitting comfortable in that transport unit for 8 hours at SeaWorld, then going back into their habitat, and essentially checking off that we could see that dolphin would do that, be cool, calm, and collected for that duration of time. So it was cumulative in nature, 1 hour, and the next approximation, an hour and a half, and otherwise. So when we knew that those dolphins were comfortable at 8 hours, we had tremendous amount of confidence that they were going to be comfortable for the entire duration of the trip. There's no guarantees, obviously, but we're developed. We know what to expect with that particular animal, and the animal is developed. It knows what to expect. And then not just bottlenose dolphins, California sea lions, otters, and otherwise. The otters got to spend a lot of time in their transport condos before they went on the move. So we knew they were going to be comfortable in there. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but comfort for marine mammal means, will you sit here? Will you eat? Will you pay attention to me? Are you alert and aware over the course of this move? During transport. So this picture, and sorry about Eric Ochen's smile, sort of distracting from all of that. But if you look down the way here, you'll see those are those same dolphin transport carriers. There is a dolphin resting comfortably there, just down in front of Eric's hands. And so we've got a couple of attendants there as part of the move. So during transportation, the caliber and the quantity of attendants is a key variable for us. We make sure that on every marine mammal move we have a veterinarian present, at least one. Commonly, and in the case of these larger moves, you'll have a couple of veterinarians present. We'll scale it based on the experience of the individuals and the numbers of animals that are participating in the move, and honestly, the types of species that are participating in the move. Cetaceans get more attention, even if they don't necessarily require more attention. Your rate limiting step, usually in terms of how many people you can have, is how many seats are available, or whatever the load of capacity is of the platform that you're on, or honestly the number of seats. So I'll harken back to where we're focused on planning. Again, you're reviewing the caliber of your staff based on the number of people that you can have on there and their overall experience, and then trade-offs in terms of who's going to be getting trained as part of that move. For the Abu Dhabi transport, we try to have one personal attendant per couple of animals. And in that case, we added a couple of more for the overall support of the move. I can't remember exactly which platform limited us to how many individuals. And in large part, it's not that important, but I want to emphasize that you've got these individuals assigned to usually, if at all possible, one staff per animal, plus your veterinary support. You do have species-specific environmental conditions. These are well documented in the references that are out there. I mentioned already temperature control being critically important. For cetaceans, and we sort of lump most of the other marine mammal species in here, we do maintain cabin pressure at a lower altitude. If you were to just fly your bottlenose dolphins at the cabin pressure that we all fly at, we know, because back in the day, they experienced this, the animals will have respiratory difficulties. We maintain cabin pressure at 5,000 feet. We work very closely with the pilots to make sure that we are accelerating or decelerating, or the drivers in the truck were accelerating and decelerating in a more cautious and careful manner than they otherwise would if they were just hauling cargo. And then we'll also work with them on the angle of approach, making sure that we're not, they're not just jetting off into the sky and water is pouring out the back of the boxes, and then everyone's, pissed at everyone because we don't have any water in the dolphin boxes. Their plane is flooded, and so they get it pretty quickly how careful we need to be as part of these moves. And again, this is where experience comes into play, because when we are when we're traveling with people we've traveled with before, as you can imagine, this is all known. Still, we go through the steps, we monitor, we bring our own equipment that will help us assess what the actual conditions in the cabin are, so that we can walk up and say, hey, my thermometer says it's 55 degrees in here. We said 45, so let's get it fixed, eh? And then critical to all of this is active monitoring of the animals and attention to the animals. Remember, precious cargo. We want to make sure that these guys are not just safe, not just healthy, but comfortable over the course of this move. And so, having been a veterinarian on these transports, you're going from box to box, you're getting heart rates, you're getting respiratory rates on some set interval. It's ebbed and flowed over the course of my career. We used to do it every 5 minutes. For an 8-hour flight, you just weren't able to keep track of all of it. But now it's periodic, and we have good assessments, and we're taking notes. And we're using equipment where we can. We have portable EKG meters if we need to get a heart rate or an EKG on an animal, to the extent that it helps us make determinations about how stable that animal is, and we can utilize that as well. Check the temperature of the water. You get it, right? We're monitoring every single variable we can reasonably to try to keep our hands and keep abreast of how that animal is doing. And then the staff too. So I mentioned comfort, and eating is one of those ways that we know that a marine mammal is comfortable. Any animal is comfortable as part of its move. And so we bring food, and we do feed the dolphins and feed the animals over the course of the move. That's why we need filters on the other end to keep the water clean. But an eating animal is a comfortable animal. And so you'll be, your animal care professional, your animal trainer will be standing over the animal and offering it food. And as a clinician, you're asking, hey, is so-and-so eating? And they're like, yeah, we're doing great. So it is, I want to emphasize, it's an active process. We're not just setting the animals in their transport unit and looking at them every once in a while. We're caring for them, engaging with them, and talking to them quite a bit. Okay, so let's assume we've gotten all the way there. This is my second to last slide, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the post-transport process. So let's assume you've safely gotten from point A to point B. Your work is not done. You haven't just arrived and you can put the animal in the water and away you go. You're good to go. You have pretty significant post-transport considerations. So we do a veterinary assessment, assuming there's no reason to rush that animal back into the water or right into its habitat. We do a veterinary assessment along the way, but certainly one last and, if possible, thorough veterinary assessment before the animal goes into its habitat or into the water, which may include blood work or collecting some other diagnostic sample. And that gives us essentially a point zero. We're in the new space. And if we notice something odd in the coming weeks and days, we can try to figure out, all right, did that happen before we left, because the last blood we had was 2 days before we left, or did that happen as we got here? So we'll get that spot veterinary assessment before they go in the water. And then obviously the veterinarians will remain actively engaged in what that animal is doing at minimum on a daily basis to see how they're doing. We probably won't do a physical exam on a daily basis if all things are equal, but definitely a veterinary check-in every single day after they move. And remember, there's if you're going from zoo to zoo, there's usually a bit of a baton pass here. So, you're handing the animal off to somebody else. And so you want redundancy there too. Local veterinarian, traveling veterinarian, talking to each other and coordinating and making sure that that you've got a good solid baton pass there. And then when things are normal, days, weeks, based on how the animal's doing, you can resume your normal preventive wellness programming for that animal as well. The animal care professional, either the folks on the transport, or if they're exhausted, somebody else will stand in and we'll do a 24-hour observation on the newly arrived animals for as long as deemed necessary by the veterinarian. But we try to assume something's going to go wrong with that animal, and then are usually pretty happy to find that nothing does. But we don't want to assume that everything is okay with the animal and then have a problem arise. And then those trainers, those animal care professionals, need to do an immediate behavioral assessment of the animal as well, because we want to read how well it's integrating into this new environment. As Dr. Keller referenced, there's the stress of the transport. That's novel. We mitigate that through, as I said, preparation, planning, and otherwise to make it as comfortable as possible for the animal. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that they've just arrived in a brand new environment with potentially brand new social environment, if not physical environment. In case of the Abu Dhabi move, we were lucky because we had animals that had lived together before, and then they all arrived together and they could partner back up again, or whatever was happening with that dolphin population. But it was 3 different groups of bottlenose dolphins coming from 3 different parks. And so we were also mindful that these guys were living together in a social environment for the first time. They didn't all go into the exact same environment, but you will have novel groupings when you do this. And so that immediate behavioral observation and assessment is critical. And again, not overstating this, but using their willingness to eat. Dolphin, if it eats right before you leave, and it eats during the trip, and it eats as soon as it gets back in the water, I love getting a text, everyone is heads up and eating. That's great. You've done your job. It's gone really well. And then I alluded to this, but this idea of the continuity of care, right? So because you are transferring the animals from one group of caretakers to another group of caretakers, we'll do everything we can to overlap those teams as much as possible and to share the proclivities and nuances of the individual animals' likes, wants, needs, and otherwise between those teams. And so it's not at all uncommon that before you move that animal, you do one of 2 things. You either have the receiving staff come and spend time with you learning that animal at its origination facility, so at SeaWorld if we're moving to another zoo, or we'll have our staff go with the animal and then stay there for days, weeks sometimes, coordinating with the recipient team and making sure that we have a real solid level of continuity of care, both at the veterinary level and at the animal care staff level, so that we're controlling the variables, we're minimizing change to the greatest extent possible, and we're smoothing the transition for the animal as it moves from point A to point B. I think we're okay on time, right? So I'll go to the next slide here, and then I'll open up for any questions that you might have. There are a host of references out there, and I do want to emphasize on this slide that the work that we do, there is a fair amount of regulation behind marine mammal transport. I mentioned the permissions that we seek when we're moving marine mammals through National Marine Fisheries Service, awareness through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, APHIS, and animal care. I'm sure there'll be more discussion about the animal welfare regulations over the course of the next couple of days, but I wanted to point out that there are standards there. I mentioned IATA, the International Air Transport Association, live animal regulations, the dolphin structure, the animal transport units that are used. That is a tremendous reference. I see a lot of heads nodding, so people are quite familiar with that document. It's updated annually. We've been proud to contribute to those standards and guidelines over the course of time. If you're moving internationally, obviously CITES has transport guidelines that you have to be mindful of. And then for marine mammals anyway, our Bible of marine mammal care, although there's other great references out there, is the CRC handbook, which was last updated now about 5 years ago. And there is and has been in previous editions a chapter on marine mammal transport, which I was proud to contribute to along with my colleague Keith Yip from SeaWorld, drawing on the experience of many folks who have worked at SeaWorld or for the US Navy or for the Alaska Sea Life Center or for other organizations out there that have years of experience doing this really, really important work. So with that, I will I'll come to a close, but just by emphasizing one thing over and over again, which is I want to go back to what Dr. Keller said. You know, we have come a long way over the course of time here, and I'm fortunate to have grown up and worked in a world where animal arriving alive, to Chad's point, was never part of the consideration set. It's always been part of the mentality has always been, we have more detail and about a decade more experience and new tools with which to make sure we're maximizing the health and welfare of the marine mammals that we're moving, staying on subject. But when I started as a staff veterinarian at SeaWorld in 2005, I was indoctrinated into this exact same mindset, which is precious cargo. We're going to focus all of our care and attention on the safe movement of this animal, safe and efficient movement of this animal from point A to point B, with all of the same level of attention, again, if not science, paid to the animals then as we do now. And to do that, it requires everyone in this room and all of the people that work with us and for us focusing their attention and their energies on those animals and doing so in a way that's organized, methodical, but also really focused on the care and attention for the animal. So I'll go back to rescue and rehab for just a second, because that one you might imagine could get fairly transactional. You're moving fast. You're not able to really focus on that animal. You don't know that animal from anyone. And you feel a sense of urgency that you have to get it back to your rehab facility and make sure that it is okay. But we're very fortunate at SeaWorld to be able to move animals in both conditions. And so we do emphasize that even if that animal is critically ill, we want to move safely as far as humans are concerned. We want to be effective as far as everyone is concerned. And we want to maximize the well-being of that animal and reduce the variables that we might be introducing as soon as we put hands on it. So we take the gold standard, all of the care and attention and detail that we put into the move for the animals that we live with, the ones that we're fortunate enough to care for every single day and be part of their lives that live at SeaWorld. And we focus all of that energy on that rescued animal that we're moving from the beach on an hour-long truck drive from Brevard to SeaWorld of Orlando in a refrigerated truck. So, and we're only able to do it because we have care and caring people who work with us and are committed to that animal's health and well-being. So with that, thank you very much for letting me talk to you here a little bit and kick this thing off. And I think we can take a few questions.
We have about 4 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So if anyone in the room has a question, please raise your hand and wait for a mic. If you are a virtual attendee, please put it in the Q&A and Karen will ask it in session. Also, in the event that you guys do not have a chance to answer your questions, Dr. Dold will be part of the panelist at the end of the day today, and you'll have a chance to still ask questions.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a first question right here.
Thank you. Very interesting talk.
Thanks.
One thing of particular interest for me was the written transport plan that you spoke about, and that you said that you share that plan with USDA. So I have two questions. Sure. One, how much of that written transport plan is required by regulation? And two, what is your internal review mechanism for that plan, such as a committee or certain individuals at your organization that need to sign off?
Yep, sure. So without overstating it, if we're moving a dolphin domestically and from point A to point B with regards to the USDA, I misspoke. We don't run that overall transport plan through them. It was for international transports where the permissions, comparability work that you're doing to make sure that USDA is doing to make sure that the facility that animal is going to meets the same standards as, meets the Animal Welfare Act standards here in the United States, meets the same standards as a US facility. And as part of that, we would share that, we did share and would share for any future international transports, our transport plan with them. But when we're moving domestically, we're not required to share that transport plan with them. For internally, our internal controls, the transport plan is essentially developed by the primary transport leaders in our organization, and those vary based on the park that you're in and the type of animal that you're moving. And then we will, up to and including my office, and we have a small committee in the corporate office for our entire organization that would review that transport plan, advise against it, and ultimately sign off on it.
Okay, Karen, do we have a
All right, next question. Do you take controlled substances for sedation, anesthesia, or euthanasia with you during transport? And if so, how do you satisfy DEA regarding security?
It varies. We have brought controlled substances on. This is a question from the internet. Is that right? So yes, it really depends if we're traveling domestically or if we're traveling internationally. Internationally is much more complicated, but if we're traveling domestically, if we can avoid bringing controlled substances on the plane, we will. Generally speaking, for any of our transports, unless we're using emergency drugs, we will travel with an emergency kit on every single move. But I would say 99% of the time, if we are using any sedation whatsoever, it's a benzodiazepine. We probably have it on board early in the trip. And so we're generally not carrying too much along with us on the trip. That answers your question.
Okay, next question.
Kind of in the vein of your emergency kit that you travel with, can you talk a little bit about your plan for euthanasia if something goes horribly wrong, how you make that decision or what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's brief because look, we've been knock on wood here, we've been very fortunate over our history to not be confronted with a situation like that. However, and for any animals that that live with us, rescue and rehab is a different story, obviously, but any of the animals that live within our parks, we can avoid having to be considering euthanasia as part of that trip along the way. So I will double check and get you the definitive answer here, but I don't think we commonly transport. I can't remember having transported with euthanasia solution on board for any of our moves, which in hindsight may be a mistake. We just haven't been confronted with it. We are usually focused on being able to recover the animal. So we'll bring everything short of euthanasia solution, endotracheal tubes, everything we think we're in need in order to stabilize or recover that animal as part of whatever they might experience. But euthanasia is not part of our top consideration set. Yeah.
Dr. Dold, do you feel it is important for some animals to have a person that the animal knows to be present on the transport? Does that seem to contribute to the comfort of the animal?
Personally, I do. Yeah, I think so. The question is, how well do they have to know the animal and how much preparation have we done before that animal makes its move? But whenever possible, again, we can't bring everybody on the trip that the animal knows, but when we can bring a few key people who that animal has experience with and they have experience with that animal, we know that our likelihood of a safe and comfortable and calm animal for the transport is greatly enhanced.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dold. Everyone
Okay.
give him a round of applause. Thank you very much for your time.